This is Mrs. Maydell Jones interviewing Mr. Homer Rhoads.
Rhoads.
Rhoads. June the 24th, 1971. Mr. Rhoads is a native of this part of the country and has many, many interesting background things to tell us. Mr. Rhoads, you want to start out with telling us when the first things that you remember about this part of the country? You came here from Kansas, you said, when you were...
I was about, I can't remember too much, but it seems like I remember. We lived in a little 3-room house about where that, I don't know what to call that, it's about the second door up from the Davis Electric Company on the back of the lot. And it was just my brother and I at that time. And he was 19 months older than I am. I was born in 88, and September 20th, and he was born in 87, the 20th of February, exactly 19 months. And my mother was giving us a bath in the back room in a tub. That's all they had. We bought water from a water wagon at 25 cents a barrel. And we carried to keep a tub over the top of it, you know. I was drinking water and everything else. There was no ice or nothing. And I run off out. Somebody comes to the front door, and she went to the front door, and I went out the back door naked. And it was just a couple of doors down to my father's saloon. Well, some cowpoke got one of his neckerchiefs and made me a diaper, and they had me in the bar, walking up the bar drinking blackberry brandy.
And what did your mother say when she found...
She didn't know it. And another time, I got lost. They thought I was lost, and they had everybody in there. Where the Davis Electric is was a music store, and there was a piano box out in front on the sidewalk. And they hunted everywhere in the world for me and everything else, and they found me in that piano box asleep.
You said your father had a saloon
In the
here?
north half of the penny store, he and a fellow named Jake Schweitzer. And he bought Jake Schweitzer out, and Schweitzer wanted father to go to Kansas City with him. They went in the real estate business and finally ended up making millions of dollars. But anyhow, there was a fellow named Lou Biddinger, and he was a widower, and he had 2 sons. And he'd give my brother and I 5 cents apiece if we'd go to Sunday school on Sunday. But we had to bring back that little card they'd give us, you know, from Sunday school. Well, we got wise. Instead of going to Sunday school, we'd catch some of them smaller boys and take them away from them and get the nickels. I was on it.
Well, you've really seen El Reno grow then, haven't you?
Oh, yes. And we used to walk along behind the street sprinkler after they'd graded where they'd put about, maybe 10 horses on a great big plow. And
Go ahead.
they put about 10 horses on a great big plow and plow the gutter towards the center of the street. Then maybe they put 15, 20 horses on a grader and grade it out into the middle of the street. Well, that water used to run down into the gutter until it would lay there till it was green. There was no storm sewers, no nothing else. And in those days, there was dog days, what they call dog days. Policemen, they dog laying around there, and they'd just take and shoot him, that's all. The 44 pull out the gun, kill him, policeman, right in the street. And the Indians, it was dirt sidewalks. And the Indians would sit down in the middle of the sidewalks, I can remember just as well, in front of the TGY, them Indians sitting there with painted all and their hair braided with just a breech cloth on, eating them dried whatever part of the beef they had.
Do you remember what Indians those were?
Well, they used Cheyenne Arapaho. They used to call them dog Indians because they eat dog. We used to, afterwards, after I got up to about 12 years old, every Indian had greyhounds, catch them some jackrabbits to eat. So we'd steal their greyhounds and we'd hunt this reservation. There wasn't a fence on that reservation then at all, only up at that fort. And 6 miles north, each way, north, and 4 miles east and west. And we run coyotes, catch coyotes and jackrabbits every Sunday. Till one fellow from the mill up here, his horse fell with him and killed him, and that broke it up. But we moved from where we lived on there by Davis' store. We moved down in the block about, well, I guess maybe a door or two up this side on Bickford, from Harry Laird's two big two-story houses there. Well, now there used to be a big hill that went down there from that big two-story house on the corner there. There was a hill there. We used to sled down that hill with the snow, down that hill on snow.
Did you make your own sled?
On Bickford. That is between the right at the 600 block. And it was the culvert run across that street. And it was about 4 feet high, and that creek that comes down, and goes on down through and runs into sort of Foster's basement every year. That creek that has come down through there. And at the other end of it, on Rock Island, from Joe Abbott lived in that house on the corner there was a bridge across there. And we used to get under that bridge and stick wires up through the crack to get people with their feet. And at recess at the school house I was in about the 4th grade, it sit right on the edge of the bank of that creek that run down along there. And we'd throw water on that thing at the recess. And when we come out at noon or anything, well, we could have some barrel slaves and slide down that thing on barrel slaves. But they used to whip us in them days. I went to the 1st grade there, and I went on in there, and I finally ended up in the 8th grade down with Miss McCool down in the urban school in the North Ward. Oh, but I don't know. There's so many things happen. My father, one time, my mother was sick with I guess it was my second sister was born. My oldest sister is 76. She was born in January the 3rd, 1960. 1893. And I've got two younger. I've got one 72 and I've got another 68.
Then did you stay in El Reno until?
No, I joined the Navy the 18th of July, 1905 at Guthrie. And I went there to Newport, Rhode Island. And I stayed to change my rating from a landsman to a coal passer, and they transferred me to Newport, Rhode Island. And I went up over that old Constellation over the riggings every morning before breakfast. And then we had to run to the big drill hall back and take a shower, naked, all of us, cold. Then we'd have coffee. Then we'd climb that rigging, over that rigging and all. And I got a 2 weeks pass, furlough, and I went to Hartford, Connecticut, and caught a side wheeler Priscilla and bought me a ticket to New York. And I went, of course, I ended up down on the Bowery, and I'd sleep in them flop houses for 15 cents. And in the beer joint, you get a great big beer for a nickel in the evening. And they push the tables all back from, where they sit and everything against the wall. And they would have a dance. They'd dance. Well, I finally ended up turning myself into the Brooklyn Navy Yard, walked across the Brooklyn Bridge, down Sand Street, and caught the old battleship Texas. She was in the Spanish-American War, so the flagship. She had a hole in where they'd plugged it up where she got hit with a shell during the Spanish-American War. Afterwards, took her out and shot her to pieces, made a target of her. Then I caught what they took them down to Hampton Roads and put me on a 4-stack cruiser called the Columbia. She was the fastest ship outside of one torpedo destroyer named the O'Brien. The O'Brien could make 22 knots forward, and she could make 24 knots astern. And they put me on this, and she'd make about 22, 23 knots and burn 400 tons of coal in 24 hours. I caught her and we went to Philadelphia and got 400 Marines. This is in 1906 now, the early part of 1906. And we went to, first we went to come up the Mississippi River on Washington's birthday in February and fired 21 gun salutes going up the river. And she was the flagship of the fleet, and the fleet consisted of 2 or 3 torpedo destroyers, 3 or 4 torpedo boats, and 3 monitors. That's what they call the cheese box on the raft, you know. There was the Arkansas, the Florida, and the Nevada. And afterwards they turned one of them what they call a Gardo. That's the stationary ship of the place down at Guantanamo. We coaled at Guantanamo several times where the Cubans all had a lot of trouble in there.
How long were you in the Navy?
I was in there, I got in there in July 18, 1918, and I got out in September 27. I purchased a discharge. I get $33 a month, and then I had to pay a month's pay and $45 for my clothes. I told them I had to have, that the Depression was on then. El Reno, the city of El Reno was issuing scrip for people to buy groceries and everything else. And if you had $1 million in the bank, you couldn't draw but $5 a day. That's all you could get.
Did you come back here?
Yes, I came here.
Tell us more about the Depression and what you remember about it.
Well, it's just script, just like they have these things for food stamps and everything. It's issued by the city. And that's what the border was that way for some time. It was really depression. It didn't make a difference how much money you had in the bank. You couldn't get but $5 a day. That's all you could write a check for. And I think my father sent me $45 or something like maybe to come home from Boston now. I got discharged in Boston. I slept in the Boston Commons many a night or so, and maybe have 50 cents a dollar and spend that, go to the show. But I went to the show on Tremont Street, and saw Lillian Russell. She was the Diamond Lil of old Diamond Jim Brady. I saw her there. And in them days, they had the picture shows. You could get in for a nickel. And they played the piano, and then they'd talk and tell you and illustrate all what is happening and what is going on and so forth, so that you know what is going on. Then they had pennilodiums, what they call a pennilodium. You went in them and stuck them things in your ear and with the round cylinder phonographs. Yeah. I went in one time and my ears went burned and everything. It snowed and cold outside, and my ears went to burn. My ear just stayed that way. It froze. So I went out and somebody told me to rub the snow on.
Well, when you came back to El Reno, did you go into business?
No, I did. I had a business. I sold a lot of whiskey, and I finally ended up.
Now let's see. That was Prohibition days, wasn't it? That was Prohibition days.
In Prohibition days, I figured it wasn't against the law to sell it before that. It was forced on us, and I didn't figure there was anything against the law. And I still don't think it's against the law. We got it now. We didn't even have a chance to vote on it or nothing else. It was forced on you. In other words, you was blackmailed into it to get into statehood. Right, anyhow.
Was your father still alive when you came back?
Oh, yes. My father died in 1913. But he was, it used to, he had the 2 saloons and all. Of course, they had gammon houses upstairs and all. And the girls used to remark about the father's saloon business or something else. But my mother, to show you, my mother and my sisters and my brother all were members of the Christian church, baptized in the Christian church. And that church there that's on Rock Island at Watts, there was a widower come there from New York to take over that pastorage. And he had a daughter, 15, 16 years old. This was about 1902 or 3. And my brother started going with her. And my mother told my brother, "You're going to have to quit going with that girl because she used paint on her cheeks. She used rouge. She can't be any good." My father had a saloon.
And your father ran a saloon.
The saloon business.
Yeah.
But, my father said if they kind of maybe slighted my sister or something and asked her what her father done on the saloon, father said if they ever ask you what your father does, you tell them he is a speculator. He bought walnut logs all in all these canyons down on this river. He had log buyers buying them walnut logs. He had 2 or 3 buyers buying cattle in northern and central Texas and herding them up here and put them in the stockyards when it was up here by the old depot. But right there at the corner of Elm Street, there where the back across the tracks from Merle's. And put them in there and feed them cottonseed. They give the cottonseed away in those days. They didn't sell it. There was no sale for cottonseed. Didn't know what was good for it. They gave it away and fed them too much to go blind. And feed them bale hay until it was strong enough to get them out to pasture. And they shipped in some. And I herded 600 head. Well, there was 4 of us. We herded 600 head of cattle. His cattle on this reservation out there. Free grass. And then he bought a farm sight unseen, sold them sight unseen. He had the oil wells in Chanute, Kansas, when the oil was 25 cents a barrel, and he didn't have any storage, no pipeline, and they charged 20 cents a barrel storage, and he lost $22,000 in that venture. Then he went to Palacios, Texas, and bought up a lot of that Texas land and drilled artesian wells, cut them up into 10-acre tracts, and sold them as fig farms. And when he died, he was fixing to build a cannery to can figs at Palacios, Texas. And when the 1901, when they opened this country down here, he went down there and opened a bank with $5,000 capital and had $390,000 deposits. When there was no banking law, could took it all if it wanted, but they called him honest Abe. And if you shut that off a minute, I'll tell you something. I don't want this to get in it. On the corner of that, where the central school was, we lived on the other corner, across the catacomb across.
What was the population of El Reno then? Do you remember?
Oh, it couldn't have been over 1,500, I would say. Across the street, catacomb across the street, on the schoolhouse corner, on that vacant lot there now, on that corner, that would be that corner like that. Goldie Rockwell lived there with her mother and father. Her father was a bartender, and he died there, and she sold the place, and she married Red Dow, Clyde Dow. And they had a daughter, and she owned them 2 lots, I guess, across from the 40 people there. Well, his mother then married Tom Abbott. And Joe Abbott, run the Kerfoot bar in there where the Ritz Cafe is, in the Kerfoot Hotel. And there were 2 little brown cottages there, and they lived in one. And she was a Christian Scientist, and he took sick, and she wouldn't call the doctor and everything, and he died. But let's see what I'm going to tell you about. And that Kerfoot Hotel was one of the finest hotels there was, you might say, west of the Mississippi River. They had music there in the evening at dinner. They had nigger men waiters with towels over their arms, and they gave you service, all them little dishes and all this, that, and the other. And a fellow named Pedro Lapatino is an Italian. He came to El Reno with a harp, small concert harp, and a barrel. But anyhow, I got the gamble and everything. He learned to deal the roulette wheel. So he played for supper. He played that harp in the Kerfoot Hotel at dinner in the evening with the music. And he worked in the gambling house for dealing the roulette wheel for my father. They've got a roulette wheel back here, you see,
Yeah,
it's been
so
donated. I'm the only living man in El Reno that knows how to deal it.
When were you married?
I married Enid. We eloped. We caught this 4 o'clock train out of here in the afternoon, and my sister went with us as chaperone. We got up to Enid, we got the county clerk, and got the license, and they called the judge, and and we went out to the courthouse, and the judge married us. My sister caught the 10 o'clock train out of Enid and come back here on a midnight train, and we stayed in the France Hotel over on the west side of the square overnight. And then the next day, we got the train, and we went to Wichita. And my partner and I, we had a pool hall, and on the corner there, I stayed across the street from the gas company. And my partner, Charlie Brown, he used to be at Union City. Saturday we was married, and women went to parade around after marriage, and they went in them stores, and they about broke me. So the next day I wired Charlie Brown, my partner, for $100 when I got to Wichita. And he wired me back, he says, if the game is good, wire for more.
In comparison, Enid was a big city then, wasn't it?
What?
Enid was a big city in comparison to El Reno.
No, there wasn't too much difference.
No?
No. Enid didn't, of course, there was lots more business. But in that other run there, when they run for that land in 92.
Now, which land? Where was that?
The land where Enid is now.
Oh, I see.
My grandfather had a mare. He was a breeder of Hamiltonian trotters. And he had a mare, he named her Enid because he rode her in that to get him a farm. Instead of getting a farm, he got a town lot in Enid. Uh-huh. And instead of the town lot was worth more than the farm because it had a well of water on it, and they sold water for 5 cents a bucket. And he got more money out of the well than he would if he'd owned the farm. Oh, so many things I could tell.
Well, tell me.
Well, after I had come back, we picked up 400 Marines on at Columbia to go to. They was having an election in Panama. They had 7 miles of the canal dug. The French had blowed up there. They lined us up on deck, all of them, and gave them 3 ounces of quinine a day. And I was an engineer of a steam launch, 28-foot cutter, burn coal, and when the ground swells were so big that it would roll the booms under. You couldn't tie up to a boom sticking out there because you did, you'd roll you under. We tied up at the dock every night. And we got to drinking too much of that rum over there. They finally iced us in every night. And I come back, and when they left out of Panama, the ice machine broke down, and the hams all got full of skippers, and everything was full of bugs. Flour was all full of bugs, and they was feeding all those men. There was about 400 with the fever, and they was feeding them that corn willy, we call it, monkey meat, corn willy and beans. That's all I had, and it's put that in there and bake it. It just looked like a bunch of awful. But anyhow, when we went into San Juan, Puerto Rico, and they put us in quarantine with a yellow flag on us, and some officers come from, I guess, from the shore, or either I took some off of the boat to go to shore. Anyhow, with the steam launch, and I drove by the dock, I didn't even stop. They told me not to even stop, just slow down, and they jumped off. But they come back out and got me and my crew and took us and put us in isolation in a place over on the end of that island. And they kept us in there, I don't know, 15 days, I guess, or more. But it was all right. They sold Budweiser beer for 15 cents, and there was big mango trees there that big around. You could get them barrels of them if you wanted them.
Well, when you came back to El Reno, what business did you go into? You said you had a pool hall, and then what?
Well, I couldn't come back to. I stayed away then. I went to the World War then from down there in April of 18. I got in the army the 24th or 5th of April. And the first day of August, I was in front line trenches in France. I got a citation and wounded and all, and my brother was shot in the head. And instead of burning our draft cars, we both run off from our hospitals. We were both 150 miles from our company going up at the edge of Germany. We went and rode and walked and hitchhiked and everything back to our company to fight the Germans some more. We didn't. We come over there to fight. We didn't.
Weren't going to stay in any hospital.
We wasn't going to stay in. Well, they didn't give me nothing to eat. See, I got gas, and they break ammonia tubes in the gauze and put over your mouth to breathe. And the next year, I remember I caught a little cold, and I wheezed. Latter part of 1919 or 20. And they sent me, the government doctor sent me to a lung specialist. And he pronounced me tubercular because I opened the envelope or took it back to him. And said tubercular, 2 ribs up on one side and 3 on the other. And they gave me a total disability, $100 a month. That's what it was at that time. That was the limit. And it was a portion of my son got $18 as a alimony.
How many children do you have, Mr. Rhoads?
I've got just the one son. But I've got 2 grandsons and one adopted granddaughter and another something on the way, I don't know.
When we were chatting, you were telling me something about when Prohibition went out here in El Reno.
It went out 7th November 1907.
But you had some stories about that.
Yes, it went out with all of that place there at Mary Clooney's. There's a stairway goes down the side. Well, that's where they used to take the barrels of whiskey and all down into the basement. And there's a stairway twists around there. You went upstairs to the gambling house. You went that way, and then there was a stairway inside that went up. And back of that bar was a trap door. It went down, and Father had a rectifier's license. And whiskey is barreled in bond. That's 100 proof, just like bottled in bond whiskey. It's 50% alcohol. Or it's 90 proof, which is a blend. Or it's 80 proof. Well, he used to take some out of each of every barrel and put it in those demijohns and use it as a bar whiskey, so it wouldn't be too powerful and too weak. And use the bar. And then they had a big glass dome about this big on the bar that filtered the water for the chaser. There's something about that. When they built that, when that waterworks was here, when they got the water in El Reno, they just dug a big hole behind that waterworks there where it is now and throwed the dirt up high and everything. It was pretty steep banks and everything. And they had a 4-inch pipe that went across and went into the river, and they pumped water out of the river into this tank. And it was a big water tank on between Choctaw and Evans in the 600 block on the corner, back on the attic, between the 600 and 700 block on between Choctaw and Evans. And that was the standpipe, they called it. It was black, big round, like 55 feet high, because I clumb it, I know. Well, it's like this tank down here, but it was just a big round tank sitting on the ground. And we got to taste the water, it got to taste bad, and had hair in it and everything. A cow fell in that thing in there and drowned, and the hair slipped on and come through the fibers. And it was full of water dogs. One didn't kill everybody in the country.
Yes, indeed. So your father put in an individual filter then?
Oh, he had that before that. As soon as they got the water, they put it in. They filtered all their water.
Where did the water come from?
They pumped it out of the river.
Oh, I see. Just pumped it in?
Yeah. It's on a 4-inch line from that waterworks there right straight across to the river. To hold the water over there. We used to call it the stump because there's an old dead tree there. We called it the stump. That had a swimming hole. We went swimming in there every day. these kids.
Do you remember anything about city politics or county politics during that time?
Politics, well, I was pretty much on the politics. I got arrested so many times for selling whiskey that I controlled the Fourth Ward, the nigger town. I controlled the niggers. Anybody want to get elected, see me in the city office, see me. Because I voted them, I was good to them niggers. I bought them barbecue and watermelons and everything else. And it's real good to them. And when also I got in one time and had a doctor, his name, let's see, what was his name? I think of it a minute. But anyhow, I told him, I sent for him, he was a county doctor. I said, I can't stay in this place. I said, it's detrimental to my health. I was husky a bull. But I said, it's detrimental to my health. I can't stand in here. I said, you're going to have to get me out of here. He said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. He said, I'll give you some medicine. It'll make you a little sick. And when you get sick, you send for me, and I'll come, and then I'll recommend to the judge over there and the county attorney that they put you out. Well, at that time, they had a poor farm down there where the poor farm was down there, the other side of where that disposal plant is over there. The old people sit out on that porch, no screens, no flies, hot, no fan, no nothing. Just go out there and die, that's all. Poor farm. So if you go to the poor farm, it won't cost you nothing. But if you want to hire somebody to guard you, why, you can go stay wherever you want to stay. So I hired Emery Barker. Emery Barker, he's the father of the boy that married the woman, the blonde-haired woman that worked at the waterworks, and he died. You remember? But you don't remember her? Well, anyhow, she's tall, nice looking. And anyhow, I come and I got the room over that alley in that Sun Hotel. And Emery Barker, he was a friend of mine. There was a lot of them Barkers. Old Bev Barker, he was the oldest one. And Garner was his son, and his daughter married Al McDonald. Al McDonald, he was a U.S. Marshal in Alaska. And he afterwards, a fellow named Meeks was appointed under Roosevelt as the United States District Attorney. Al McDonald, U.S. Marshal. And Tom Reed was a United States Judge. And of course, when they changed over to Democrat, they left during the night and took everything but the mountains. But anyhow, this Dr. Taylor, he told them, so I got to stay up there. I stayed up there anyway. He'd go home, like $2 a day, all that paid. He'd go home supper time, and I'd louse around. I'd go everywhere at night. They had a good time over there all the time. Played cards, we gambled, played poker, and everything else. And then another time, I went over and to see Judge Crook. Crook, his name was Crook. He was the 7th Assistant Parole Officer. And I got a parole from him. And then another time, in the Army, Bob Williams was afterwards appointed United District Judge. His brother was a captain in the Army in the company next to me, and he and I were good friends. We had several drinks together and all and everything. So through him and everything, I got to Judge Williams, and Judge Williams gave me a pardon for one.
Well, after you went out of the saloon business, what did you do?
Huh?
After you quit salooning, what did you do?
I worked in nightclubs all over the United States, from Florida. I went to Florida for 30 years in the wintertime. I lived there 8 years, had a nice home, till I got this emphysema, too damp, too much humidity. I went to Saratoga, New York. I went to, when they legalized gambling in Nevada, I went to Nevada, and I was manager in the Las Vegas Club for Cal Housel. And then I went from there up to Reno, and I was manager of the Monte Carlo on, right on Virginia Street, and there was only one stoplight at that time in the whole state of Nevada. Turned off at Needles, California, and it's 100 miles up there over them gullies that comes down washes from the mountain. And I went to Los Angeles. I worked out of Los Angeles with the combinations. I worked for all of them, the golden nugget, what they call the $1 million nugget. They were all out of Los Angeles. Every mob in the whole country had a hotel out there. The Blue Mob from St. Louis and the mobs from New York, they had them a place. And they all had a place, and the Florida mob had the Flamingo. That's those them Lanskys. And this one Lansky was the one who was in that Murder Incorporated. Jake Lansky was his brother was a manager of a gambling house that I worked for in Florida, right by the racetrack in Hialeah when they built that new racetrack there. And this over in Oklahoma City, there used to be two brothers. One of them, they moved to New York. They had a big nightclub, the Stork Club. And they run, his daddy lived over there.
Billinger, wasn't it? Billinger?
Yeah, Billinger. George Billinger and his brother, they went to Seattle, and the oldest one hired somebody to kill a policeman or somebody in Seattle. And he went to the penitentiary. Then he went to New York and opened that Stork Club and got to be a very, very prominent man, and I guess a millionaire. And he was appointed as something over one of those boroughs. And they finally found out about him being in this penitentiary and fired him, remember? They fired him. And his brother George wanted me that he would bankroll it and build a building across from that Hialeah racetrack for me if I would operate for him. But I wouldn't tell him I didn't want to mess up with none of that gang outfit at all. I worked for the home people that lived there in Fort Lauderdale and everything, and I made big money. I made $10 an hour, 7-hour shift. I get $50 a shift for 7 hours, $10 an hour overtime. And if they had a good day, you get $30 to $40 extra. And I had 5%. And then the first year we opened there, it was open about 9 weeks, and it netted $152,000. I had 5% of that too, besides the $50 a day. I made around $12,000 there in less than 3 months. And I bought a stock farm down in Arkansas and raised white-faced cattle and put the whole farm in. I experimented with Timothy and with all different kind of grasses and this and that and other. And they imported crimson clover from Talladega, Alabama. And I finally ended up, the whole country's got it down there now. And I was the first one that had it all. And they used to have, there was 10 counties in the district, and they had the pasture contests. I was second once, and I was fourth once in 10 counties. And I got a plaque from the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company for soil conservation. And I liked those white-faced cattle. I sold nothing but hay, and I'd sell 5,000 bales of clover hay, and I had 100 and some head of white-faced cows.
When did you come back to El Reno?
Be 13 years next month. I come back here 28th of July, and I rented a place down on 421 South Barker, $65. And you had to go from here, come around like that, down there to the bathroom. And that woman that's got the her husband and her brother both died. You know whom he lived out on. And then I said advertised at Horsley, advertised the place for sale up there on 618 South Williams. He wanted $67.50. I told him I said, I'll give you $6,000 cash out of my pocket. He finally took it. And then I spent $4,000. And I spent $2,000 or $3,000 more. And now and there, this year about, it's been about almost a year ago, I put in that light oak paneling all in the house and everything else. It's beautiful. And then the painter is painting now. He's painting the house and everything else.
Are there many of your old friends left here?
No. And I go down, now the 90th Division, I was in the 90th Division. And I was the bodyguard of 2 company commanders. One of them was Captain Leicester. He lost his leg. He cut his leg, finally cut his leg off 4 or 5 times, finally cut off. He died. And the other one is Lieutenant de Grumman, and he lives in a town 25 miles west of Austin, Texas. And they have the 90th Division reunion at Lake Texoma, the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th of November. Well, I was down there 2 years ago. But this last year I couldn't go on account I had got medicine poisoned and I was unconscious 28 days. Too much medicine from different doctors for emphysema. And this de Grumman, he just cried like a baby. We was together, we dug holes together, these foxholes. And we'd both be so tired that we just couldn't hardly move. And he said, I'd say, you think we're deep enough? He said, I don't know. It'll take maybe pick another. I said, well, we get a little bit further down.
Is the building still here where your father had the saloon?
Oh, no, there's a frame building. They tore that down, and that's where J.C. Penney is. Yeah. But that Southern Hotel, that Kerfoot Hotel, of course, they took the dome off of it, you know. Bud Conway's mother had a wagon yard, and she gave that block there to the county to build that courthouse. Bud Conway's mother did. And Bud Conway had a fellow working for him, and he had a brother. His brother died young, I guess. I don't remember him much. Called Bowie John, and he married one of our hired girls. And called Claude Hensley of old T.F. Hensley that run the Daily Democrat of that building on Bickford now, that old long brick, that big old brick. That's where the Daily Democrat was. Old Tom Hensley was the editor of that paper. He had a son named Frank, that was the youngest one, and Claude was the oldest one. And Claude just died here a year or so ago. He's 92 or 3 years old, and he married one of our hired girls named Addie Wheeler. But I'll tell you about when my second sister was born. We wanted a hired girl. In those days, they didn't make much money. Money was money. And somebody told Father about a hired girl out here in the country about 8 or 10 miles. So it was winter time, it was cold, and wind was a-blowing, and it was snow and sleet. And Father got a team and a buggy and went out there and got her. And come back, and he had him sort of mustache, and it's all froze, ice, froze up. And brought her in, and the girl asked my mother what she'd like to have to eat. She said she'd like to have some milk toast. She heated the milk, but she never toasted the bread. Father took her back.
She didn't last very long.
Well, and we had them there that, while they did the Washington, they done it all for $2 a week. Them days. Yeah.
Tell me again what your connection was with Wayne Camel.
Ma'am?
Tell me again what your connection was with Wayne Camel.
Wayne Camel was my mother's nephew. And then one of the Camels, Dan Camel, married a sister to my grandfather. So all of their children, they had about 5 or 6. You see, there was Ed and Ed, they were twins. And there was Fred. And I know 2 or 3 girls and all. About 6 of them, I guess. They were double cousins to my mother. We used to go up and visit them. When eggs was selling for 3 cents a dozen, they used to take and boil them get them out of the haystacks and everywhere else, and boil them up, and everybody, they burned wood, and they'd put them in front of the fireplace, and boil them, and then take shells and put them in front of the fireplace, and scorch them and all, feed them back chickens for shells. Yeah, and the chickens, when we lived there at 414 South Chalk, there was a woman who used to come in every Saturday, and she'd bring us, she had a little crocks about so big, and so on level off, they hold just a pound of butter. And I guess she kept it in the well or somewhere, it's cold, wouldn't bring it in, and we'd take maybe 2 pounds of butter a week, and I bought eggs from her, and they peddled around on the streets, watermelons and cantaloupes, nickels and dimes. And she had these Leghorn chickens, and she told Father, she says, I've got some Leghorn roosters, says, fryers, says, I'd like to sell. So I want to get rid of them. Father says, well, what do you want for them? He says, well, says, I'll get 15 cents a piece or 2 for a quarter. And she says, well, how many have you got? She said, well, I don't know. He said, well, just bring them in. I'll take all you got. She brought in 3 dozen. Then they brought me this northwest corner of that lot down there of Central School was a bottling works, and run by the Dugans was the name. And the boy's name was Joe. And there was about 4 feet to the ground, and they had there was a bottling then, and there was a culvert went across the street down that ditch had come from down here, from this railroad, down in there, back in them houses and all. And we used to get down there and have them wash bottles, drink all the soda pop we wanted, have them half chilled shots to shake them up and everything. And he put them bottles under there, and the bottles were round like a Coca-Cola bottle, the top, and it had a wire, of course, it flanged outside so it wouldn't fall down in there. But down in the bottom there was a rubber, and they put their foot on that thing and fill it up, and put the foot on that, and they gas it, push that thing up, and that would stop that soda pop couldn't turn out. When you wanted to open it, you had to push that wire down.
Too bad they don't have any of those bottles here in the museum, isn't it?
I've got an old lap robe.
Have you?
We had a rubber-tired Surrey. It had red wheels, patent leather fenders. Oh, and we had a big mare. She was a big mare, weighed probably 1,100. She was supposed to have been a track horse, but she wasn't fast enough for the track, so we got her as a buggy horse, and then Father bought the best leather harness you could buy. Had big brass knobs on those hames, and that thing was shined up like nobody else's business, rubber tires and mud guards, patent leathers. And our lap robes was elk with the eyes, everything, all color. Beautiful.
And you still have it?
No, not that one. But I didn't have trouble getting the girl.
I'll bet you
Then
did.
I bought a Ford from old Pat Wallace up there, right where the Ford is now, 1914. And it had coal oil lamps, and I had to carry a can to get water out of every mud hole you come to. And it could make 28 miles an hour. Every 30 miles, you had to put another quart of oil.
How much did you pay for it?
$585, and that's the year that Ford said if you sold 300,000, you get back $50. I got $50 back and lost it in the crap game.
You're incorrigible. Well, what lap robe? Tell me about the one you have now.
It's out there in the back of the car.
Well, that's not good. I'm not going to get that on tape. Tell me about it.
Well, it's just an old lap robe. I took it down. I come out here one time at a sale over here at this place. It's been about, I guess 7, 8 years ago. And I bought it for $1. I guess people didn't know what it was. And I took it down to the laundry, and I had them bug proof it and clean it in $1.50. But before I even had that done, it fell off me $5 for it. Why, the thing, I don't know, it's worth a lot of money. There's not any. There's none of them. They're gone. But ducks, you know, when I was a boy, I used to go duck hunting. I even go by myself. Couldn't get nobody to go with me. I went one time myself and killed 64. And plovers, used to kill them plovers over on Wolf's place, over in that bottom in there. Go out and kill 25, 30, 40 in an hour. Now you don't see one ever. I was 30 years once before I saw one. And I used to see ducks, they'd be so thick in the evening, about the sun going down, that would darken the sun, the ducks fly away. And then before this was the end of this Choctaw Oklahoma Gulf Railroad here, you know, was nothing but ranches all out in the west out there and everything. And El Reno had about, well, when it had 4,000 people, it had about 22 or 3 saloons. And pretty near every saloon had a gambling house. And you see those prairie fires, you see the reflection of, like, the reflections of the sun in the evening for miles and miles. Prairie fires way back yonder. There was an influx of people come in here. It was like the boat landing of the immigrants landing at one time. Was Hollis Gilmore. I don't know whether you know him or not, but you know the Gilmore Flats. Well, he built them. He married Gotellis' daughter. He was old Gotellis was an auctioneer. He had one daughter. And Bill Gotellis. Well, there was Hollis Gilmore, Dave Guyan. Dave Guyan run the saloon business until the saloons went out. Then afterwards he got to be city manager. Davis Guyan, and lived in a 2-story house right back over there, back from that whiskey store, before they'll get to the viaduct. Dave Guyan, and on that corner where they tore the house down, across from the Safeway, McNeil's lived there, and he was a saloon man. He had 4 or 5 kids. The daughter, Goldie, the oldest one, married Sam Wallace, died here a while back, railroader. And that house there now, that 2-story house that's there now, across from the Safeway south, I moved from there to 511 South Choctaw just before my son was born, 62 years ago. 62 years ago I lived in that house, $20 a month. Boyd Wilson is 4 months younger than I am. And Race, this Ralph Schwartz, the plumber, is 4 days older than I am. And Ray Lane, Dr. Lane's son, he was a dentist, and after he got to dental college, he opened up an office up at Watauga, and he stayed up there. Well, I don't know whether they had 1 or 2 sons. I think they had a son and a daughter. He's at my house with Mildred Laird, Mildred Morris. She was my sweetheart when I was 15. Mildred Morris, they come to our house twice lately. And they lived at Ray Lane, and his wife, Anna, lived at Antlers. And he's had 2 strokes. He's about, I guess, a year and a half older than I am. He's had 2 strokes, and he don't know anything, and just laughs all the time. And if he didn't make her sell everything, the worst, she fell and broke a hip here a while back. It's on a crutch. If he didn't make her sell everything they got and everything in the world, and have that son of theirs drive them to California to live in California with the daughter out there. Now that isn't going to last. But Dr. Lane one time, after Prohibition, I drank everything. I drank sweet spirits and niter and Jake and canned heat. Drank 1 can of canned heat one time down in Louisiana. And Lyco used to be a drink thing called Lyco, and it was about 24% alcohol, I guess. And I bought some in that drugstore over there. I was just staying up there at Southern. I got sick. And I sent for Dr. Lane. I had them bottles lined up on the dresser. He says, "You've been drinking that stuff?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You drink enough there to kill 10 men.
I wonder you didn't end up with Jake leg or something like that.
Well, I went to Florida where I could buy that Canadian club, 36 ounces to the bottle for $3. I got good whiskey. A whole case for $35. Those Canadian quarts, you see. 36 ounces to a quart. I mean, in Florida, I made world money in Florida. World money.
Do you expect to stay in El Reno now?
Well, yes, I don't have to. And every time anybody asks me, "Says you come back to live?" I said, "No, come back to die." And I live close.
That's going to be a long time.
I live closer to the cemetery now than I've ever did.
That's going to be a long time. Well, Mr. Rhoads, we've just about run out of tape, and it has been a great, great pleasure. And I just wish there were more people who would tell us wonderful things like you have.
If I'd think it all, there's a lot more to it.
Well, we certainly appreciate it.
They used to ship them cattle in here, and the cattle had the Texas fever, and they couldn't ship them in without dipping them. And when that stockyard was down there at Elm Street, I've seen them bring them in here and they've been dipped in that creosote, and they was so hot with that hot sun born down on them, they'd get down, and they'd turn the water on them and lay there and drown in the water, just burned up with the creosote. We talk about humane society. Father used to ship them in, maybe 8 or 10 dead in the car. Get down, couldn't get up. It's poor. They'd put them in stockyards up there and feed them cotton seed meal and hay until it get them strong enough to drive them to pasture. Then here'd come along a blizzard once, and they drifted to the south fence as far as they could go, and I think 22 more head died there. Post death. And he still made money on it.
Your father must have been a very, very interesting man.
He was, and I'll tell you, he was the greatest man that ever lived in El Reno. They call him Honest Abe. There never was a widow woman in this world that ever wanted to groceries that he didn't see that she got them. Or if she needed coal, she got coal. And he took care of every living human that he could, I tell you.
Well, you have wonderful satisfaction then of knowing that he helped establish this wonderful city.
If he did gamble and all. Of course, he drank too. That was all right too. Everybody drank in those days. I see the U.S. Marshals up there playing weed, gambling. Chris Madsen. I went with his daughter. She was my sweetheart.
Oh, really?
When I was in the 6th grade, yeah. Chris Madsen, he was U.S. Marshal, and they moved to Guthrie, and she was the secretary for the, died over there, she was secretary for the Shriners. Yeah. Mamie Madsen.
Well, we've got to bring it to a close because that's the end of the
Chris Madsen's son, Reno, married Jessie Waring. Waring was a big fat man, had a brother big and fat, and they had a feed store. And they live in Fort Worth.
Oh.
Reno.
Again, I thank you. It's been a joy.
This is Penn Woods. The date is June 24th. I'm getting one comment from Mrs. Maydell Jones, or Mrs. Mac Jones, who has just made the previous interview. This deals with an experience with Will Rogers, which I would like for her to tell about. Ms. Jones, would you tell us about this experience?
Back in 1925, I was working with the Daily Clarion Ledger in Jackson, Mississippi, and Mr. Rogers was on a performance tour at that time. Of course, I was a young girl and very excited to see such a prominent man, and he came into the editorial room and was giving passes out to the different men. He handed one to our editor, and the editor said, thank you so much, Mr. Rogers, but I'm terribly sorry I'm not going to be able to remain for the entire performance this evening. And Will popped up and said, damn few people will.
We will turn to the other. This is a postscript to a tape that was made some time before with Colonel Bernard Kellner, who told about the Oklahoma infantry at an earlier date and also about teaching school in early days. But I wanted to add to this, Colonel Kellner, a little bit about your experience in athletics and how the athletics took place in the early days in the schools. Why don't you talk about your experience there?
We may think that the interest in athletics and self-amusement is something that originated in the last 5 years. This is not true. The same interest in athletics and self-amusement and playing together existed at the turn of the century that exists now. The environment was different, meaning that there was not the availability of equipment, the availability of trained people in athletics, or athletics was not as clearly organized as they are today, or in other words, it wasn't big business. It was simply for time-consuming and fraternization and visitation and care. And it divided in two parts, you might say. At school, we had recess and noon, and we played different kinds of athletics. Baseball particularly, we always had a baseball team. There were 3 kinds of baseball. There was a 1 and 2 man old cat, and then there was the ante-over. I will just tell you about the baseball. The baseball was the same as it is today and had certain rules, had the umpire. The umpire in those days stood behind the pitcher. In these country areas, if they had a baseball, a commercial baseball, and a good bat, they were way ahead. Usually they had to provide themselves with some kind of a stick or whittled out bat, or even in the case of a ball, wind up string and make a ball out of it. This ball, they played baseball, as I said, like they do today. And the teacher had to teach them, and they taught themselves. In my district, it was in Bysci, Oklahoma, or near Bysci, about 8 miles from Bysci, Pioneer District number 55. We had more good fortune than most districts. A pioneer there was a Union soldier and thereby a pensioner, and he had money every month or every 3 months, whichever it may be, and he had grown sons that were athletes. So we were always fortunate in having at least 1 mitt and a regular baseball and a regular bat. Uniforms, nobody worried about that if they just had some clothing on, and in the summertime, of course, they didn't need any shoes. They went barefooted. And they had organized teams, schools did, and if they didn't have school teams, they would get on a location on Sunday afternoon in some cow pasture that was level enough and lay out a diamond and choose sides. They chose sides by taking a bat, and each one hand over hand, and the one that came out at the top got to choose the first first member of his team. So then they alternated till they got their team, everybody on it, and went at it. Now they had their difficulties there, just like they have now. They didn't believe the umpire knew what he was doing, and they threatened the umpire, and et cetera, like they do now.
We will turn over this tape for the next interview.